Welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Krasner. I'm director of the Mercer County Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education Center, housed at Mercer County Community College in West Windsor, New Jersey. And today I am delighted to introduce you to our featured speaker, Julie Brill, who authored this book, Hidden in Plain Sight, a family memoir and the untold story of the Holocaust in Serbia. So she's going to have a brief presentation and then we'll kind of and I'll interview her and we'll open it up to questions. And let me just read to you her bio so you get to know her a little bit. So Julie Brill has been collecting family stories since she was a little girl. She is a lactation consultant, childbirth educator, doula, and the author of the anthology Round the Circle, Doulas Share Their Experiences. Her essays have appeared in various publications, including Haaretz, The Forward, Balkan Insight, Kveller, Cognoscenti, and Hey Alma. She shares her family's experience in the Shoah with middle and high school students through Living Links. The mother of two grown daughters, Julie lives near Boston, Massachusetts. And Julie, if you could just say what Living Links is for
Yeah,
these.
I would be happy to. So, Living Links is the organization that unites all of the 3G organizations in the US. And 3G is the third generation of Holocaust survivors. So, people who have a grandparent who survived the Holocaust. And they're out of USC, University of Southern California. They're part of the Steven Spielberg Foundation.
The Shoah Foundation.
Thank you, the Shoah Foundation. There are apparently 1 million descendants of Holocaust survivors in the US. When I heard that, I was floored. It's like such a huge number. So some of us are part of this organization, and there's an education component to it. We're trying to teach the next generation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead with your presentation.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I wrote the book because I very much wanted people to know about the story of the Jews of Serbia, of course, what happened in the Holocaust, but also there was a community there for centuries, and there actually still is a community there. I appreciate you coming out to hear the story. I wanted to start just with a little bit of what I knew as a child, which was the genesis of this, and show you some pictures. So my father was a very young survivor of the Holocaust. He was not even 3 when the Holocaust came to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, where he was living, and that we're talking April 1941. In fact, his earliest memory is of that bombing. He remembers that bombs made a particular whistling sound. I can't do it, but he can make the whistling sound. And he remembers running through the streets with his mother. They were running towards a bomb shelter. They didn't know that Hitler knew where the bomb shelters were, and they were actually targeting the bomb shelters. And he remembers coming back, it probably 3 days later, some period of time later, his mother had put a plate of cookies on a wardrobe before they left, and the vibrations from the bombs had made the plate fall and split in two. And this little boy, not even 3 years old, was fascinated by this plate so neatly split. He had dropped a cup and it had shattered, and why was this plate split? And he told me that story. I was probably the age he was when he first told me, so 2 or 3 or 4. I grew up with these stories, and it was very much this child that my father had been sharing these flashbulb memories, these very vivid but very short memories of things that had happened to him during the war, to me, another little child, absorbing these memories. So it became almost like his memories were my memories. They weren't, of course, I wasn't there, but it feels like they were. And then the more I learned, the more I wanted to know more, and my father didn't know the more. He had these very specific stories, but he didn't have the historical context. And I actually thought as a kid that both my grandfather was murdered in the Holocaust, my father was a Holocaust survivor, and also the Holocaust hadn't come to Belgrade, because otherwise, why wouldn't somebody talk about it? Why wouldn't there be some book on the library shelf about it? And I always wanted to fit the historical context into these childhood stories, these memories that my father shared. And initially, it was going to just be, I wanted it for myself. I wanted it for my children and my niece and my nephew and that kind of thing. And then one day I was at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And if you've been there, there's a vast bookstore, and the books are arranged alphabetically by country. So I walked myself down to the end of the alphabet to Y for Yugoslavia, and there was no book there. And that's when I knew, oh, actually, this needs to be told. It's not been told in English. This needs to be a book. So just to share with you a little bit of those pictures that are in the book, but these are some of the pictures that I had in my family as a child. Can you see this? Two
Yes.
people on their wedding day. Excellent. So the pictures were not the way you might hope to have pictures in a frame on the wall or in an album. They were in some envelope, and in my childhood memory, they would just show up. Like maybe my mom was cleaning and found this envelope, and my brother and I would hold the pictures by the corners, and I would stare at them and try to figure out who these people are. These people are my grandparents, Alexander and Regina, but I didn't know them. So I was fascinated. Did they look like me? Did they look like my dad? What would they have been like if I had known them? And we had these pictures. And as I've gotten older now, of course, I've outlived my grandparents. I just look at them as these two beautiful young people who should have had, another 60 years of life in front of them. Um, I know little bits about them. So my grandmother was a seamstress and she sewed this dress. And later during the war, she will cut up the train and make clothes for my father and my aunt. So we had these four pictures. Sorry, it's not scrolling. This is picture one. I might have to go in and out to show them to you. Um, and sorry with my technical difficulties here. Um, Screen share again. So the second picture that I'm going to show you is my grandfather, and the baby is my father. Well, you can see that as well. Um,
There we go.
oh, but we lost it, right? Why is that happening? I'm going to have to show them to you not on full screen because that's what seems to work. I just practiced saying technology loves me. Okay. Well, anyway, you can see it now, right? Even though it's small.
Not yet. Now we can.
Excellent. Okay. So this is I thought growing up that we had two pictures of my grandfather. I've showed you the wedding picture. This was the other picture that we had. The baby is my father, a much wanted and loved first child and first grandchild. And my father is Chaim, but in the old country he was Heinrich, and he was named for his grandfather. I was always confused about that because his grandfather was alive, and I have the record actually that his grandfather was at his bris. But we can talk more about that and why he was named for somebody who was living. Here's the third picture that we had. This is my grandmother. Little boy is my father. Just fun fact, this is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on the pail. So this is probably 1939 in the Balkans, and Disney had already made their way over there with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Um, so this is the interwar period. My grandparents are young. My grandmother is in her 20s. And they have kind of they're precariously middle class, I would say, and they live in the Jewish neighborhood of Dorchel, and they're very assimilated, and they have this little boy, and they are living this life that they, have no idea what's coming. One more picture. This is the fourth picture we had, and this is actually the cover of the book as well. This is my father again, and my aunt, Shoshana, born Liliana in Serbia, in Yugoslavia, and this is the spring of 1943. So if you know already some of the history of what happened in Eastern Europe, 1943 is really late, right? The Holocaust came very early to Belgrade, and by the spring of 1942, the Germans are already declaring that Belgrade is Judenfrei, free of Jews. So that they are standing a full year later on the street, not hiding, was always this mystery to me, and part of what made me feel like maybe the Holocaust really hadn't happened. Recently in my research, I learned you couldn't have a camera in German occupied Europe. The Germans did not want you taking a picture on the street of anything, whether you were going to give away military secrets inadvertently or intentionally or whatever. You could not just have a camera. My grandmother, who apparently was a very strong person, had this picture taken on the street after, Belgrade was Judenfrei, and went and got it developed. The kid went to the photographer, got the picture back. If you think about how it worked before things were digital, and saved this picture. And I think that she very much wanted it to show my grandfather, who by that time had been disappeared, but who my grandmother very much wanted to believe was alive, which was the rumors. I mean, it made more sense that they had taken these young, healthy Jewish men and moved them to do labor for the Reich than what actually happened. In my research, I found what may be one more picture, third picture of my grandfather. And this is the picture. My father always says things like, of this, they took a picture. Who would take a picture of this? This is the Jewish men rounded up in April 1941 and being registered by the Germans to do slave labor for the Reich. And Serbia has been occupied for less than 2 weeks at this point. So things happened very, very fast. And they are in an ancient fort called Kalemegdan, which is in the center of Belgrade. It's a city park now. Without a sign of what happened, you could go there and throw a frisbee or walk a dog or have a picnic. You would never know that this is what happened. I have looked very closely for my grandfather. I cannot find him, but you can see past the first few rows, it's really hard to see the faces. But I'm working currently with the Holocaust Museum Yad Vashem in Israel with AI. They are sometimes able to see things that we can't see with our naked eye. So I'm hoping that we will find Alexander Brill, who is my grandfather, and you can see from this list, we know that he was there. This is his registration. He was number 182. He lived on Salenska 8. That's the street in Dorchel, the Jewish neighborhood. And you can see, if you look at a map and you compare it with this list, he was registering with his neighbors, probably men he had known all his life. And look at the letters. It's Serbian, right? It's the Latin letters, but it's not German. They made their lists in the local language because they had a lot of local help. I might just stop there, Barbara, unless,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, so I'll start with some questions.
yeah, great.
Uh, One of the things that fascinated me in your book was three generations of your family going to Serbia.
Yes.
So talk to us about how you made the decision to go, to invite your daughter and your father with you, and what you experienced there. It sounded completely life-changing.
I love that question. It was life-changing. Just want to start by saying that when I was growing up, Serbia was like Oz. I mean, it was a place that you needed like a hot air balloon and some magic to get to. It didn't seem like a real place. My father would tell us these stories, and it just sounded like fiction. It sounded like fantasy. So he would say things like, "Yeah, my great-grandfather was a doctor to the king." Doctor to the king, and everything my father said turned out to be true. Like in the research, you can see he really was the doctor to the king. So it was this sort of fantasy place, and we were separated by, the Iron Curtain. Yugoslavia was and wasn't behind the Iron Curtain, but we were separated by communism. My father came to the U.S. as a young man after his service in Israel and worked like an immigrant for 50 years. There was no time, there wasn't a lot of money. I didn't speak Serbian. There were lots and lots of barriers to us going. And then there's a day after my younger daughter has started college where I realized like the barriers are gone and my dad is still young and healthy, and we could just go. And so we start to plan this trip. And my dad is kind of like he's excited, but he's also like dubious. Like, are we really going? He keeps asking me, are we really doing this? And I also feel like really, Belgrade is a place you can like buy a ticket and fly to. Okay. And then my daughter, who's 20, decides she wants to come, so it's like a three-generation trip. And it was life-changing. I mean, that's what Barbara said. That's a good way to describe it. We flew into the airport in Belgrade. It's called the Nikola Tesla Airport. He was an American immigrant, but he was a Serbian immigrant. There's a long history of Serbians leaving Serbia and always being welcomed back. So we're going through passport control, and my dad is on a U.S. passport, but his place of birth is Belgrade. And as soon as the agent sees that, he starts to welcome him, and that was just the feeling everywhere we went. We were just welcomed. The Serbs do this triple kissing, Europeans do double kissing, but there's an extra kiss, left, right, left, if you are in Serbia. So there was a lot of this triple kissing, and we felt like so warm and welcomed by our family there, but by everyone. Um, and that's juxtaposed with the government and their lack of willingness to talk about, one, the Holocaust that happened in Serbia, and two, there, was a lot of resistance and active partisan army, but there was also a lot of compliance and capitulation by the local people that made it possible, like everywhere in Europe. And when we got to the place where my dad lived, Salinska Ulica 8, in this what had been a Jewish neighborhood, which is now a Jewish neighborhood without Jews, that you have to look really hard to see. There's some Magen David in one place. There's a little bit of Hebrew writing, but people walk back and forth through that neighborhood. It's called Dorchel. It's very central, so it's like a hip place to be now. There are bars and restaurants and stores, and they have no idea that not just the history of what happened in the Holocaust, but this 400 years of Jewish people living in this neighborhood. And so I very much wanted something, some marker. And I, with my kind of American optimism, thought, oh, I'll get something. Like it's an oversight. And what I wanted was something called a Stolperstein, which is a little stone. It's about this big. It fits in the palm of your hand. A lot of people have seen them if you traveled in Western Europe, if you've been to Amsterdam, to the Anne Frank House. They're the largest decentralized monument in the world, and they put them outside the last voluntary residence of victims and survivors of the Holocaust to kind of unite families. It's just a little bit of information, but it's enough to know the name of the person, their birth date, when they died, and where, or if they survived. And I wanted that in Belgrade. At the time, there were none in Serbia. This is 2017. And I thought, oh, I'll just get some. It was not that easy. The government really doesn't want those kinds of markers, but they also want to get into the EU. So there was finally, we were able to get permits. I worked with a local NGO called Haver Serbia, and they were able to put 10 stones in Belgrade. We went for the installation. One was for my grandfather in 2022. That was a really big deal. So now there are 10 of these stones, and they're working. They think there are going to be many more placed next year for survivors as well. So this kind of weird juxtaposition traveling around of the warmth of the people and also no markers, just standing in these places where horrible things had happened. Yeah.
So talk about your visit to the cemetery
Oh,
there.
yeah. So we went to the cemetery, to the Jewish cemetery in Belgrade. Um, it's in pretty good shape. A lot of times in Eastern Europe, there's no one left to tend to the cemeteries, the Jewish cemeteries. There are no survivors still living there. And so often they are trashed, but also often people live there because they know that no one is going to come looking and throw them out. In Belgrade, it's better than that. The cemeteries are maintained. I say cemeteries because there were two, are two. One is for the Ashkenazi community and one is for the Sephardic community. Belgrade historically had both communities of Jews, but they didn't have a lot of interaction. They spoke different languages. They sent their kids to different schools. They prayed at different synagogues, and they had different cemeteries. And so we went to the Sephardic cemetery, which is where my family is. And if you've ever been to a Sephardic cemetery, I never had. But if you've been to one, you probably know they have the pictures up of the people. So you can walk along see the gravestones and not just the name and the dates, but you actually get an image. And so we walked along and we saw the grave of this great grandfather to my father that I mentioned, who was doctor to the king. It says so on the side, on the front of his stone. And my daughter went around to the side, and there was another marker, and it was for Solomon, um, who was my grandfather's first cousin. And what I learned was that's very common, that Jews who were murdered who, of course, in the Holocaust did not have their a marker, that other relatives, if they've survived, would put a marker on an existing stone. And so that's how we found out about him and about his mother. We were able to get these Stolpersteine for them as well. We went and saw my great-grandmother's stone, and it had fallen, so we were able to put it up and repair it. You know, that's the biggest kindness you can do is for a dead person. They can't repay you. And just being in a place where we were so clearly rooted. I live in New England, and there's a saying in Vermont, you're a real Vermonter when you have four grandparents in the ground, right? That's how you're from a place. So I'm never going to be from anywhere, but my dad is from Belgrade, and we really saw that being in the cemetery and seeing those stones. So, yeah.
Yeah, that just reminded me of how the Nazi ideology viewed whether you're a Jew.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you just needed one grandparent.
So, so what did your father come away with after this trip? How did he feel?
Um, I mean, I wish he were here. We could put that question to him. I mean, he's alive and well. He's just not in the Zoom. But I think that for him, it was really a homecoming. I mean, he was welcomed back in such a way, and he hadn't forgotten where he was from. So we stayed in the Hotel Moskva, which is a big old hotel in the center of the old city. And we stayed there. I felt sort of mixed about it because it was Gestapo headquarters during the war, but we stayed there because my dad remembered being a kid, 8, 9, 10 years old after the war, empty pockets. And he said, like, we didn't have a radio. We would just walk around the city for something to do. And he would walk by the Hotel Moskva, and they have like a grand outdoor cafe. And he would watch the fancy people eat and drink coffee and smoke. And, I wanted him to have the experience of coming back and being a fancy person and, sitting on the street and, drinking his coffee. And so he got to do that. I think that was really wonderful for him. But also being in the place where something happened elicits memories. And so he actually was remembering more of these really painful things while we were there. I mean, so he had an aunt by marriage who had lived across from the Hotel Moskva. He was saying above the elevator. My father's an engineer, so this is the elevator, with moving parts. And she lived like on the fancy fifth floor. And they went to visit her after the war to say goodbye. And I had never thought about that before. I mean, I knew they went to Israel and the arrival, but I had never thought about this departure. They were
Mm.
leaving Europe forever. I mean, my grandmother was done with Europe. In Yugoslavia after the war, Jews were okay. It wasn't Poland where they had pogroms after the war. So there was communism. Everybody sort of was equaled out. They had other people living in their house with them, but they had a place to live and they had food coming from the Jewish community. And she still was on that second boat out of, Yugoslavia in December 1948. She wanted nothing more to do with Europe after everything that had happened.
And what did your daughter come away with?
I was so happy she was there because my father was t a lot of the stories we'd heard before, but he was telling them in the place where they had happened, and she was there recording them on her phone and hearing them. And I thought, like, oh, I hope someday she has kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews, and she's telling them this story. Like we're just like reaching down another generation, and by that, doing that, we can reach more generations. I think like me, like she really couldn't picture what it was and where we were from until she really stood there and saw it. And it was exhausting. I mean, she was exhausted. Every day was like 10 days long. Like, is it still Tuesday? We're really tired.
Well, it's
Yeah.
physically and mentally and
Oh,
emotionally
yeah.
exhausting.
All the things.
Did you keep a journal?
I took a lot of notes on my phone. At that point, I already was thinking it was going to be a book, but I just wanted all the things because I knew that it was so much was happening that I wouldn't remember it if I didn't write it down. And then some of the stuff I read later, and it was like a stranger had written it. Oh yeah, I do
Uh,
kind of remember that happened now that I see that I myself typed it into my phone.
so talk about how your father and his mother and his sister went into hiding.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to give you a little bit of the context of what was happening in 1941. So, April 1941, very early in the war, the Germans come in. As I mentioned, they rounded up the Jewish men. And my grandfather was among them, and they did slave labor for the Reich. I have a street pass, so I know that my grandfather, with his neighbors, was repairing sewers. One of the things the bombing did was it destroyed the sewer system. They didn't have a working sewer system, which was a big problem. So they made these Jews report for work 6 days a week. They didn't pay them, and they were digging ditches and laying pipe. But they went home at night. They didn't have a camp system set up yet. And then around my father's third birthday, um, my grandfather doesn't come home. That's August 1940, 41. And now they have a camp. But first, of course, my grandmother thinks he's been killed. She assumes the worst. And then it turns out it's a camp in the city that my grandmother can go and visit. And the Jewish men that were held there, in fact, were dependent on Jewish women, wives, sisters, mothers, daughters, to bring them food because the camp really had nothing. And the camp was centrally located. So I know there's a lot of discussion in Europe about who knew what, and maybe people didn't know, but in Belgrade, they knew. They were walking past that camp every day. And when I went and saw that, you can stand on the street and just see the camp and see people walking past. They still don't know what happened there, but they were doing that when these Jews and these Roma were held there. I understood why my grandmother was so angry and why she ultimately left. My grandfather disappears in November 1941, and now they're coming for the women and children. They've built another camp across the river, but in New Belgrade, but in view of the city, in an old fairgrounds. And that camp was a terrible place. There was only one survivor, a baby. We met her. Her name is Esther. She's an old woman now. She was sure that her parents and my grandparents were friends because they were around the same age and they lived across the street from each other. Um, my father and my grandmother, and by now my aunt has been born, were lucky to escape that fate. I think that was your question, Barbara. So they leave the city, just go to the outskirts, and they're living on this horse farm. And my father actually remembers it as kind of like a magical place. Like he's this sort of Tom Sawyer. He's fishing in the river, and there's a rowboat, and he's collecting eggs from the chickens. But he's also watching. So there are German officers who are coming on their day off to ride the horses there, very civilized, paying for it, the whole thing. And at night, there are partisans who are storing things in the spaces between the horse stalls, ammunition and supplies and guns. So they're coming in and out and taking these things. And then eventually they steal the horses as well. And my father is just watching. So a lot of his memories, because he's getting to be a little bit older, are of this farm. He remembers they had a German shepherd. And the dog would alert to the bombs. This time it's near the end of the war. It's the Allies bombing. Belgrade is the only city that was bombed by the Germans and then by the Allies. So the Allies are bombing Belgrade, and before the radar can alert the civilians, the dog is barking, like he can hear it. So those are some of the memories that my dad had. We tried to find the farm. We knew where it was because he remembered this mint on the hill. That's where the radar was, or whatever, how they were detecting the incoming bombs, and a river. It was like a very distinct set of circumstances. We could find on Google Earth where we thought it was, but we never were able to actually find the location. And it's really probably part of the soccer fields now. It's become very urban.
Who owned the farm?
So the farm was owned, well, I don't know who the farm was owned by. The farm was run by my grandmother's mother. And that's how they were able to go there. So one of the secrets that I uncovered, family secrets, was that my grandmother converted to be married to my grandfather. And the way that it worked in Serbia, because the Serbian Orthodox Church is very patriarchal, and your saint comes through your father's line. Um, all of the religions, therefore, were very patriarchal, meaning that whenever there was a mixed marriage, the woman always converted. So in this case, she was German Catholic, converting to Judaism to marry my grandfather, and we didn't know that. So the farm was run by this wild German woman who was my great grandmother, who was doing kind of all the things, working with the German officers and probably speaking German with them, and also working with the partisans. She had a son who was a partisan. And that history we never learned in school because we only learned like Europeans come to the US for generations. We don't learn about the migration in Europe. But those German Catholics had been living in that area for 400 years. They had come from Germany on wooden boats down the Danube, and they had used the boats to build houses, and they maintained their language and their culture and their religion, and they were very distinct from the Serbian culture in all the ways. And so that was unknown to me until very recently.
Was Serbia part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire?
Most of it was not. So the river is the boundary, and Belgrade is just on the border. So there are what's called New Belgrade, which was built after the war, and Zemun, which is another now suburb of Belgrade, or maybe even part of the city, are across the river and were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But the old city of Belgrade was not Ottoman Empire. So, but right at that crossroads, which if you know that, you know the history, it explains a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I just keep thinking about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, we would talked about that with our Jewish Serbian guide when we were in Belgrade, and he said, yeah, like Jews are the salt in every story. Like there are Jews in that story too. Like it's part of that plot, you know? Yeah.
do you know, so the Jewish community in Serbia is several centuries old. How did they get there? Do you know?
So there are Jews that came after the destruction of the Second Temple. How did they get there? I assume by boat. I don't know. And then that community of Romani Jews was absorbed into the Sephardic community. So the Sephardic Jews in 1492, they have to leave Portugal and Spain, and they go lots of places, but one of the places they went was to Belgrade. And they established a community and they spoke Ladino, which is like Spanish, sort of the equivalent of our Shakespearean English. It's old Spanish. It's more true Spanish than what they're speaking in Spain now. And it was really a Sephardic center. So the first Ladino printing press was in Belgrade. And they were was not integrated, but well tolerated. They were a very stable community for centuries. And then in the 1800s, Ashkenazi Jews start coming in from the north, from Austro-Hungary. And I have family in both of those categories. And then, as I said, living nearby, but very separately. So that my great-grandparents were an intermarriage. Ashkenazi and Sephardic is really unusual. When people who know hear that, they sometimes think I'm not telling the truth or that I'm just confused. But it's true.
Would you give us a reading?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll read just from the beginning, so there's not a lot of setup. This is, you had asked Barbara, how did we know we could go to Belgrade? This is maybe the beginning of how it becomes possible in my mind that we might do that. We cruised down the narrow street of Dorchel, Belgrade's Jewish neighborhood, with Google Earth Street View, searching for the house where my father lived before World War II. His family stretched back at least 4 generations in that Serbian city until the Holocaust snapped the links in our chain. My 20-year-old daughter Rebecca sits on a tall chair at the kitchen island of my parents' home, navigating on her laptop. My father sits beside her, leaning in to see the images. I stand behind and look between them. The back of my father's head is gray but not balding, shaved military short by my mother, a contrast to Rebecca's long, dark curls. Although my father left the country almost 70 years ago, he is sure of the address. He remembers the two-story row house he lived in with his parents and his uncles at Solinska Ulica 8. From the front window, the 3-year-old boy, who would grow up to be our family's patriarch, could see the tops of the helmets of German soldiers patrolling his neighborhood in pairs. I imagine a dark-haired boy standing on tiptoes, lifting a corner of curtain to peer out wide-eyed at the scary sight of armed occupiers goose-stepping past. His mother had forbidden it, so it was a naughty thing to do. We are in Falmouth, Massachusetts, at the shoulder of Cape Cod's bent arm, in the familiar kitchen where we've shared many summer breakfasts, birthday cakes, and late-night bowls of popcorn in our pajamas. Behind us are floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the salt marsh, and beyond that, Waquoit Bay. I was married on that deck, and Sophie, my younger daughter, took her first steps there on the July 4th before she turned 1. Rebecca leads us virtually up and down the street, but we can't find my father's childhood home. Looking at the computer screen, it's as if I'm in Dorchel, a Jewish neighborhood now stripped of its Jews, watching out the window of the Google car. I see pedestrians and parked vehicles that happened to be there in a moment and now dwell there permanently. We spot Hebrew writing on one building and a Star of David on another. We roll by the synagogue and the Jewish community center where my father, grandmother, and aunt lived after the war in a single room in an apartment with 4 other survivors, including a rabbi. Back and forth, but the home my father remembers seems no longer to be there. It almost feels like technology should allow us to scroll, not just across the world, but across time. There should be a button to click for a street view of Dorchel circa 1938. I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And so tell me how you got to Amsterdam Publishers.
Oh, Amsterdam Publishers is fascinating. The woman who runs it, Lisbeth, is Dutch. She's not Jewish, and she has dedicated her life to the telling and retelling of these stories of the Holocaust. So it's a Holocaust-only public publisher, and they publish survivor stories and then 2G and 3G stories as well. And it was such a nice fit for me. I had been sending the manuscript out the way you do when you want your book in the world and getting these nice responses. You know, the writing is beautiful, the story is interesting, and there's Holocaust fatigue. Like, no one wants to hear this story. And so to find Lisbeth and Amsterdam Publishers and find a place that doesn't have Holocaust fatigue and is committed to telling these stories has been just really wonderful.
Now, reading your acknowledgments, do you have a writing group or writing communities?
Yeah, if anybody is working on a book, I hope you have a community. And if you're working on a memoir, uh, I was going to say a memoir like this, but all memoirs, I'm going to say a broad sweeping generalization, there's probably some exception, are about trauma on some level. Like even if your memoir is about winning the lottery, it's probably about how your life was ruined by it. You know, it's like there aren't a lot of just, and then a nice thing happened and another nice thing happened. People don't want to read that. And so a writing group, the right one, can be like really a source of support. And we can be really protective and careful with each other as we share these stories that we oftentimes haven't told anyone or certainly haven't told publicly before as we're forming them into books. It's quite a process.
Well, good. I'd like to
Yeah,
open it up. I'm going to unpin you,
great.
and that way I can see everyone, and open it up to questions from the audience. Does anyone have questions for Julie or comments? You know, as she says, the Holocaust in Serbia is not something we hear about.
Yeah. You can ask me anything about that. If you have family from Serbia, please, multiple times during these Zooms, I've found people that are probably my cousins. So if you're my cousin, definitely let me know. You know, it seems like everybody was intermarrying and it's related if you're Jewish and from Serbia. But I'm happy to answer any questions about the history or my family history or the process of writing the book or
Well,
what have you.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Would you consider writing a children's book?
You know, it's interesting. There are a lot of Holocaust books that are written as YA books or like rewritten. There's a version that's for young adults. I'm not sure that, I mean, it wouldn't be this story because my
Yeah.
father was such a young survivor. We wouldn't write a picture book, I don't think, you know, for 4-year-olds. And I was not a child discovering this. The memoir is really about my trips and my discovery of the history. So it would be a different book. I mean, possibly. I've thought a lot about how we share this history with children, which obviously it's important for kids to know in an appropriate way about what happened. And also, we don't want what happened to, I think, largely our generation, this first generation learning about the war and the Holocaust at a time when, everybody over 40 could remember World War II. We learned it in a very unfiltered and I think for me, traumatic way. I was thinking about who might hide me and how I might run and if I could pass and all these things. So I thought a lot about how to teach it appropriately to children so they can absorb it and not be traumatized. Yeah.
Has your father given oral testimony?
He did recently. So during the pandemic, he did a Zoom testimony with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC, and I was in the room when he was doing it, and it was fascinating. Just the process of the way the interviewer does it and the details of questions they're
Mm.
asking. Well, did you have a radio, and where did you store your food, and what was in the kitchen, and like all these kinds of details that I had never thought to ask. And it's all recorded. And we actually have connected with people who have found that recording on Zoom. I mean, people who are interested in the Balkans and World War II, there's just not a lot of these recordings.
Yeah,
So we've connected with people that way too.
great. Any questions from the
I
floor?
I
Yeah,
have a
Julie.
question. Hi,
Yes.
whoops,
Hi,
I'm
Dana.
Dana Krug. Hi. So I've been doing genealogy since I don't know, I was like 8 years old or something. And obviously in
Yeah.
the last few years, or like 10 or 12 years, things have been much easier to come across. So I was wondering where if you did any research, like what sources you used. And I don't know if I'm not I don't have relatives, I don't have ancestors from Serbia, so I'm wondering like did Jewish Gen help you or were there other
Yeah.
resources that
Um, are you doing Holocaust related research?
no, well, what turned out I have a um well, I think it's extensive, like 4,500 people on my tree, and it just doesn't go back as far as I'd like it to because of it's very hard to track all of this. Most of my ancestors were I guess is from would be parts of Poland, Ukraine, Russia, uh, Romania, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and none of them, they all came, the last one came in 1902. So they actually didn't know that they had relatives that had been survivors or had been murdered
Right.
until pretty recently.
Yeah. So you
So,
have found people in Ukraine and Poland that are your
well,
relatives?
um, okay, this is really, and through Jewish Gen, I actually found a hidden child who was our cousin. She's about my mother's, I think she's my mother's third or fourth, I think she's my fourth
Yeah.
cousin. Yeah. Hidden in the sense of like put in a box out of the ghetto
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That's really
and
interesting.
like saved by um a family
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I have used Jewish Gen. I have not been able to get back that many generations in using Jewish Gen. I had the luck of being able to use this wouldn't help you so much, but there's a Jewish museum in Belgrade for the former Yugoslavian countries,
Hmm.
where it was incredible what the records were. My grandmother on my mother's side was born here in 1910. I don't have records on her. She was born in Boston. I live near Boston. I don't have records on her the way I do, on the Serbian side, just what I was able to just get as a treasure trove. That was really luck. I know that a lot of the cemeteries in Ukraine, I also have family from Ukraine, have been documented. There's one man in Ukraine who has dedicated his life to that. I don't know if you
Hmm.
have connected with that, but you can access cemeteries, and that's often a way if you're tracking a last name, or even to just start. If you can start with one stone and go backwards, because often it will say on the stone, it will say both names. If it's a woman, you can go backwards
Right.
that way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. I think similar things in Poland too, right? There's a Jewish museum in Poland that you probably have connected with already.
Yeah, but for Poland, you have Jewish Records Indexing of Poland, which is um, a massive database.
Yeah, JRI.
Yeah,
Um,
I used to
mhm.
be on the board,
Oh,
and
interesting.
um,
Yes.
and because my family came from the same town as Stan Diamonds, so
Oh,
I
wow. Okay.
so I was part of that inner circle that started JRI Poland.
Hmm.
Uh, but I can't do that kind of research on other sides of my family, like from Austria-Hungary, where there were no records before 1877. I mean, there might
Right.
have been, but they don't exist.
Right. And
Yeah.
no last names, right? So you can't trace it back.
Well, the thing with Austria-Hungary is that, and Galicia in particular, is that the children were seen as illegitimate, so they're not
Yes.
under the father's name, they're under the mother's. If you don't know the mother's name, you're sunk.
Hmm.
So,
Yes.
all you can do is the best you can. And this is I was talking to Julie before that I'm working on a genealogical memoir about the grandmother I never knew. This grandmother was from Galicia, and her birth record is under her mother's name, but
Mm-hmm.
she has siblings who are under the father's name.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
did hire a researcher in Ukraine, and I was all set to go to visit the shtetl, and then COVID broke out. And then I was all set to go 2 years later, and then war broke out. So I may never, I find it important, as Julie has, I'm sure, to stand on the ground, which I did do for my mother's parents, shtetl in Poland.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's why
Yeah.
I could say to you, Julie, that it must have been life-changing for you because going to my grandparents' villages in Poland was life-changing for me.
It's amazing. I always loved cemeteries here and walking through old cemeteries and seeing that, piecing together who was related to who and how they died and when. And to be able to do that when it was my own family, was just like you say, it was life-changing. I could imagine my grandfather and his siblings like standing around the grave where their mother was buried, those kinds of things. Like, and we're standing here now. Yeah.
Well, and that was a very moving part of your story is the imaginings while you're on the cemetery ground,
Yeah.
which you do get. It's like, well, how many of my ancestors have been here, have walked this particular ground? Are my shoes in their footsteps?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
great. Any other comments or questions? It's a fascinating story.
Thank you.
No other comments or questions. Joanne, you're muted.
Does your father remember his father being taken or
Thank you for
anything
that
like?
question. My father doesn't remember his father at all, even though he remembers things like I was telling you about the bombing. His father was still living there with them but he doesn't remember his father. Was his father there the day of the bombing? Had he gone somewhere else? I mean, he doesn't remember him at all. And I think you know, memory is so interesting, but sometimes forgetting can be really protective.
Mm,
So he only really has what his mother, and he had two uncles, his father's brothers who survived the war, what they told him about his father. He doesn't have any direct memories. And there wasn't kind of a moment when he was taken because all the Jews were arrested and registered, and then they were sent home, and they lived at home from April to August while they were doing the slave labor. And then one day they went to work and they didn't come back. So there wasn't a moment where he was like stolen out of the house, in the way that you see those kinds of scenes.
yeah, because you always just read about them being put onto trains or telling them to report at a certain place. I hadn't realized that they could just go and never come back.
Right. I mean, the history
Yeah.
in Belgrade is very different. So there were no trains, there were no remote concentration camps. The camps, there are three of them, and they are right in the city. And they were actually, Auschwitz existed at the time, but it was for like political prisoners, and there were no gas chambers yet. So when they got the large camps in Poland up and running, they were often modeled on what they had done successfully. It's a terrible word to use for that, but efficiently in Belgrade. Belgrade, there were no gas chambers because they didn't exist yet, but they had a mobile gas van. So for the women and children who survived the winter, they were putting them in shifts onto this van and telling them they were moving somewhere else, and they were actually gassing them. The van only worked when it was moving, so they were driving through the streets of Belgrade. It's a history that we don't know. And so when I would hear the stories that were part of that history, it was so confusing for so many years. It's a different story. But The majority of Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust were murdered outside of camps. This is the story of what happened in Eastern Europe of people being murdered in their very near their homes. And these are mostly where the missing are. So there's 1 million Jews, we don't know their names yet. And they're mostly from this area, from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
so your grandmother was just hoping that he would come home. She,
Yes, yes. So they have so there's a day where she comes. So the way they set up the camp was there was nothing. So there's a letter that exists where the leader of the Jewish community is begging the Germans for straw. Could they please have straw so the men don't have to sleep on the ground? And they didn't have uniforms and they didn't have food. They were dependent on food and clothing coming from the community. And so there was this coming in and out of the women and children were coming to the camp. They couldn't go into it, of course, but they were coming to the fence and they were passing things through. And that was allowed. It was the only way the men would survive. And then one day my grandmother went and the gates were open and the camp was empty. No one was there. My
oh,
grandfather had just disappeared. And the rumor was that they had been moved elsewhere to work for the Reich. I mean, on some level, I think my grandmother chose to believe that, but it made more sense than the reality. The reality was they were using the men as hostages. So there was an active partisan resistance in Belgrade, communist resistance, and they were doing a lot of sabotage. And so every time a German officer or soldier was killed, they killed 100 civilians. And every time one was wounded, they killed 50. And they went through this camp this way. Now, they weren't just killing Jews and Roma, they were pulling Serbs off the street as well. But this was an easy pool of civilians, and they murdered them all very close to where the camp was by firing range in that way.
yeah,
And that's like something that I think, I mean, who would want to believe that? But also, it was so unprecedented. And it was just, I think, really hard to believe.
yeah,
My grandmother never knew that. I mean, we know that from the research. We have a yard site date now, the day that my grandfather died. But my grandmother just always believed that he was going to come and find them. And there were
oh,
enough of those people coming in after the war from different places that even that was not, it didn't seem impossible.
right. Well, that certainly is different than the regular story you hear. Yeah,
Right. Right.
thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you for
Really,
listening.
So I have a question for Brianna, if you're there.
Brianna,
Yeah, Brianna Darting.
I don't
I'm
see
here.
Oh,
Brianna.
she's here.
Oh,
So how
okay.
do you think we might be able to get Julie's story to the rest of the state?
Um, there's a lot of ways. So this is not a story that we have a lot of information about. So I'd be happy to share your book. So for those that don't know me, I'm Brianna Doherty. I'm the managing director for the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education. And we can absolutely share um, your book with schools. We posted about the event tonight on social media, so we know people are seeing it. A couple of my curriculum team has mentioned that they have it and they just haven't gotten a chance to read it yet. But we are looking for ways of incorporating more individual stories, especially from the children of Holocaust survivors, into the classroom. So it's a unique perspective on that history. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can incorporate it. Absolutely.
Well, plus we'll have this recording.
Yes,
That's wonderful. Thank you, Brianna.
of course.
Yeah.
Well, great. Any other thoughts or comments? Well, I highly recommend the book. There's a lot of talent and skill in this writing.
Thank you.
It could not have been easy to do. Uh, as a writer myself, I can attest to that. Um, so I want to thank you, Julie, so much for the opportunity. And thank you all for coming tonight. Our next event is November 12th in commemoration of Kristallnacht. It will be in the center at Mercer County Community College, where we have Susanna Rich. She's a poet. And actually, she's going to talk about the perpetrator side,
Interesting.
which
Yeah.
is her family story.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening to, a little bit of my family story. There's more in the book, Hidden in Plain Sight, a family memoir and the untold story of the Holocaust in Serbia. And if you want to find me, my website is just my name, juliebrill.com. You can email me from there if you have a question or want to share something.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Night.